I think the 2025 season is a big one for Toledo. I think there are a lot of expectations for this team and Jason Candle and what they need to do. And today we're going to talk about how they achieve that. We'll take a look at the top players as well as the schedule and talk about what expectations should be for the Rockets this year. The offense figures to be in good hands, but we also, I think, thought that last year, and this was an offense that was kind of all over the place, and you lose quite a bit of talent that will make life a little bit more challenging than it was last year. Losing guys like Jerwan Newton and Anthony Torres definitely hurts the passing attack. Jacques Stewart is gone for the rushing attack, but a guy like Junior Vander Ross coming back makes life a little bit easier for your quarterback. 957 yards and 5 touchdowns. Not going to be a guy that takes the top off the defense at 5'8", 182 pounds, but he is a reliable player who can make some tough catches, make some acrobatic catches, and they're going to need that in some of these games. The MAC is one of the most difficult conferences to win just because of when you look at the in-conference games, you see a lot of balance in this conference, and that makes things really tough. And your offense is going to have to play consistently, and this offense needs to take a step forward this year. Flipping to the defensive side of the ball, another group that lost quite a bit of talent, but the secondary is in pretty good hands. Avery Smith was a second-team All-MAC conference selection, and it's easy to see why. Teams definitely tested him quite a bit, and honestly, when you lost a guy like Kenyon Mitchell, you knew that teams were going to test these corners. Avery Smith got tested quite a bit, hence the 14 passes defended, but he did have 2 interceptions, 58 tackles, so he proved that he can handle life on his own. 5'10", 185 pounds, so maybe not the NFL prospect that his predecessor was, but still a guy that can handle his own. The offensive line loses multiple starters, but Ethan Spoth coming back makes life a little bit less uneasy. The fact that you have a reliable player coming back, you have some good depth, I think, too, but you're in need of 3 guys to start and step up. So that's going to be a challenge for sure, but having Spoth coming back has good size too at 6'4", 302 pounds. You have some new faces coming in for the rushing attack and the passing attack, but the offensive line is really where everything gets started. Now there's the quarterback position, and the quarterback position honestly was pretty decent. Overall, I think that you have to appreciate what Tucker Gleason did for this team. 2,800 yards, 24 touchdowns, also limited the interceptions with 8. He also ran for 364 yards and 7 more scores. He might have to do a little bit more of that unless he has some new guys that he can find. Downfield, you lost some talent to the NFL draft. You lost some talent to the transfer portal. Having Junior Vander Ross coming back makes things a lot easier, but you're going to have to find some other players downfield. This is an offense that finished 40th in passing, so they're hoping that can continue, but he might need to do a little bit more with his legs, or he might have to improve as a passer in terms of production. Either way, it feels like they have a lot of confidence in what he can do, and he'll be a big reason why they have success. Now, while the defensive line definitely loses a ton of talent, they also return quite a bit as well, which speaks to the depth they had at that position. Anthony Dunn Jr. is another guy who we could keep an eye on in terms of a sleeper for the NFL draft, but he's got a lot to prove as well. Now he gets to prove that he can be that guy. He can be the man on this defense, and he has a lot of help from the guys that are gone. DeAndre Ragan and Darius Alexander were 2 guys that gave him a lot of information on how to be a dominant player, and I think that he has the potential to do that. 25 tackles last year, 7 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. I think they have a good 1-2 punch up front that's going to make life a lot more difficult for the teams that they face and a lot easier for the guys behind them. The other guy is Martez Pointer. I think at one point people thought maybe he wasn't going to return, but the fact that he's back speaks to the potential this group has. And again, if this group is as disruptive as we know they're capable of being, this is going to be a fun defense. 30 tackles last year, 7 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, which for a defensive tackle is pretty impressive. You look at this position, usually you don't get that kind of production. So you have guys coming back that can be all MAC selections and can get Toledo to where they want to be at the end of the year. An interesting player they brought in from the transfer portal is Trayvon Rudolph, the former Northern Illinois transfer. Initially went to San Diego State, changes his mind and comes to Toledo. When you look at what he's done in the past, this is a guy with tremendous ability. This is a guy who can definitely make life very difficult for the guys lining up against him. He's not going to be the bigger guy of the guy between him and Junior Vander Ross in terms of size, 5'10", 187 pounds, but he is someone who can definitely make some big plays. He can also factor into the return game, so we'll see how they utilize him. He can also be a runner, so you have a lot of options with Trayvon Rudolph. You feel like this offense has a ton of options, and that can only mean good things this year. Now to the running back group, and when you look at what they have coming back, Connor Wallensack is the returnee that you're probably focused on. 458 yards last year, 1 touchdown. And like you said, when you lose Jacquez Stewart, that's obviously going to hurt. And you bring in quite a bit of talent to add depth. But he is a guy that I think kind of flew under the radar because he wasn't the starter, because he wasn't the go-to guy. But he is someone that getting him back will help this group. It gives them a reliable player that can help this rushing attack, and that helps the offense as a whole. Now, at his peak, Chip Trayanum is the best player on this team, plain and simple. When he plays at his peak, he's that good. Now, you look at what he's done in his career. Starts at Arizona State as a running back, transfers to Ohio State to play linebacker. They ultimately have to use him as a running back and doesn't get used as much. Transfers to Kentucky, only plays 3 games last year, so it's been kind of disappointing since he left Arizona State, and now he's hoping that things can get turned around. Now I'm curious to see, will they also use him at linebacker, or is he purely going to be a running back? That's what I don't know. I haven't been able to find anything that speaks to that, but if he is back to where he needs to be from his Arizona State days, you're looking at a running back that's going to be an absolute nightmare for the MAC. Another defensive back to keep an eye on, another corner, Nasir Bowers, another guy that kind of flies under the radar because everyone was so hyped over Kenyon Mitchell. But this is a guy who's definitely capable of making big plays. A little bit on the smaller side at 5'9", but that hasn't stopped him from playing with a ton of confidence. 44 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 5 passes defended, 2 touchdowns, one of which he brought back for a touchdown. So this pass defense is in good hands. It's a group that finished 47th last year. They're hoping to improve upon that. Again, you lose a couple of key players that could potentially hurt, but you also feel like you return enough of depth that's going to make this group better. Finally, let's go to the schedule. Now, this is where expectations really set in. The over-under is probably set at 9, and honestly, in the past, maybe that would have been different, but because the MAC is so tightly contested, this is really hard for a team to separate themselves. And this is where Toledo, I think, is going to find out, are they content with Jason Candle winning anywhere between 8 and 10 games and maybe not winning the MAC championship, or do they expect that? And this feels like a year where they expect a MAC championship. The schedule bodes pretty well for them to do that, but again, it's the MAC. You just never know what's going to happen. You're going to lose to Kentucky first game of the year, though I say that as if they didn't just beat Mississippi State last year. But Kentucky feels like a different level than Mississippi State, so that's probably going to be a loss. Western Kentucky's got a ton of turnover on their roster, but that's not going to be an easy game either. We don't need to talk about Morgan State. I'm not worried about that. At Western Michigan kind of flew under the radar last year and is still doing that in the offseason. They are a team that can definitely take down Toledo. Akron's not a team that a lot of people worry about, so you don't necessarily need to be concerned about that unless the first 4 games go a way that you weren't expecting. Bowling Green is going through some coaching changes, some roster changes, so we expect them to take a step back. Kent State is absolutely terrible. Washington State is probably going to be a loss on the road, but again, you just never know. They have a ton of turnover. It's basically South Dakota State in Washington State with the number of transfers they took from the Jackrabbits. So that's going to be an interesting team to pay attention to this year. Not a winnable game in terms of you're absolutely confident about that, but we'll see how that game plays out at this point in the season. Then you go Northern Illinois, Miami, Ohio, Ball State, Central Michigan. And when you look at this, you don't necessarily see games that concern you a ton, but you also haven't felt like that in the past. And honestly, if I'm Toledo, I expect a MAC championship. Yes, you have some turnover, but you have good pieces coming back. You have your quarterback coming back. You brought in good talent from the transfer portal. to me, not winning the MAC is purely unacceptable. Even if you finish 10-2, I'm not really worried about that. If you don't win the title this year, when the other guys that have competed for a championship the last couple of years, they should be down this year. This has to be a championship year. I think that at a certain point, you either have to accept that you're just going to keep coming up short or being in the conversation, or you have to expect more, and Jason Candle has to take that step. If I'm betting on it, I feel like Toledo is the favorite. I feel like they have plenty of ability to win the MAC championship. Yes, there are certain positions that have to get figured out, but the core talent they have coming back tells me that this team is the MAC champion.